commando. Graffiti artists, b-boys, the beatboxers, MCs and DJs who be proper.
Let's make some motherfucking noise for the CrateDiggaz right now. Let me hear something.
Crew tape's getting ready. Come on inside.
All right, yo. Thanks for coming out, yo. Highly appreciate everybody that came out.
I'm at the University of Lehigh there, you know, like there's a business development type of program that I am doing there.
Oh, dope.
You know,
Yeah.
but I just so happen to be like in hip hop also, edutainment, arts and culture. So like, we have a focus project. It's about like finding a mentor. You know what I mean? Like someone who you admire. You know, who has done this before, like you did. You know. So I identified you. No, because like, you know, I used to watch you, man, your battles. You know what I mean? Like when I was in high school, your battles like against like, you know, back in the days, you know. Yeah, against you know, Shed and Tie and like the Soviets and them. Like, yeah, man, you know what I'm saying?
Man. That's dope that it made it all the way out there, you know what I mean? Hip hop is a universal language, and it's ill to be able to, you know, do some shit that we grew up loving and just doing as a hobby for fun, and especially those battles at that time, they were for a DVD. So this is before YouTube even existed, and then the
so you didn't get paid off of all of those things.
I don't think I got paid for those.
Wow.
No. And the owner of the one of the partners in the DVD, my man Real Six, who was a graffiti writer and a skateboarder, videographer, like tech dude, just uploaded them on YouTube later, and I first learned about YouTube when people started hitting me up to be like, yo, you're kind of like viral on YouTube. And at that time, you know, viral was like 60,000 views, 40,000 views.
Yeah.
Kept going up. And so I found out about YouTube.
So has it always been like a passion to you, or like is there an element of business right now? Because like what I'm studying right now is about like business leadership, you know what I'm saying? Like actually getting the determination between like a passion and because like the project that I am doing, I actually want to develop like art centers back home. I want to check like the viability of like what we are doing actually, you know what I'm saying? Is there a market for it, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think like, so I've also always been involved in business separate from the music and the creative component. I mean, you know, as a teenager, when I started smoking weed, I would start selling weed right away, you know, 14, 15 years old.
Oh, wow.
I was promoting parties as a kid in high school, making a bunch of money, you know, renting venues, lying about the age of the people that were going to come. You know, this is the 90s where you could get away with that type of stuff, or be in like 18 and over clubs and people got fake ID. And then in college, I was like still selling weed, you know, on a much larger scale.
Wow.
And then I was the president of the like Hip Hop 101 committee, which we did fundraising, and we did it through parties and through raffles, and also through applying to different student funds, the activity funds and different student groups to raise money. And then I actually have a labor staffing business now where we provide crew for event setup and breakdown of like large scale events in New York City. So I've always been involved in the music, in the business separate from music. I also, you know, started a production company around my music, and that's the vehicle through which I negotiated like my distribution deal with Duck Down 3D. You know, anything that I did was like through that vehicle. So I've always been business conscious. I think some of the struggle that comes from merging passion with business is sometimes you just have to decide. In business in general, you have to decide what your goals are. And some people's goals are to make the most money, have the best margins. Some people might be willing to have a shitty product. You know, you can make bullshit cars that fall apart, but they're priced at a price point where they are viable in the market, because some people need cheap cars even if they're bullshit and they fall apart. And you might be somebody that doesn't really, you know, care if your business represents high quality as long as it makes money.
So did you like go to school to learn business, or like is it like something that you just had?
I think it's a few things. So once I started my labor staffing business, which I was working freelance, doing event production, like just getting hired to drive trucks and forklifts and do manual labor and be a production assistant, you know, in a leadership role eventually. And I just was like, man, let me just bring my own crew with me instead of being, you know, hired to manage a crew. Once that took off and stopped being like a hustle, or it was clear that it could be more than a hustle, I went back and took business courses. But before that, I think just growing up in New York City, like you learn hustle in general.
Wow.
You see the angles of stuff.
Yeah.
Kids are always, buy baseball cards and sell them, or
So it teaches you like to be a businessman at an early age.
teaches you entrepreneurship, and then on top of it, my mom was actually in the music. Both my parents are in the music business, and my mom was an executive, but she started as a secretary and had just a bachelor's in music history and worked her way up to be vice president of business affairs at BMG. So when I was a young kid, I was in and out of the office with her. I saw her hustle and her grind and her initiative. And then my pops is like a super accomplished arranger, composer, and sometimes he would be directly employed. He worked at he was the music director of Sesame Street for a bunch of years.
I think I saw something like that, on the internet.
Yeah, but he also worked freelance too and would have a recording studio. When he wasn't working at a place where there was a facility, he would have his equipment at home, and there would be a recording studio at home, and he had his own LLC, and we would go to the movies or buy, records and CDs and tapes, and he would keep the receipts and explain that this is a tax write-off. So I think, and then honestly, even my grandfather was a really successful entrepreneur who's like a rags to riches story, that he came from, being a Jewish immigrant.
Wow.
First person. I think he was born in this country, but either way, either that or he immigrated when he was extremely young.
So where was he from before he came?
My family is like all from like Eastern Europe, like Latvia and the Pale of Settlement, which is like a big expansive area on what was called Russia, Poland, which was like a shtetl, which is basically like a Yiddish word for ghetto, which just, in America, that implies a more socioeconomic thing, but it really just means like a community that's one ethnic group. So my family really came from Eastern European, poor Jewish communities. Not necessarily like poor, but not being allowed to own property, and then coming to the States because there was persecution where they were, and there was more opportunity here. And so, my grandfather was like that typical story of wear your shoes until there's holes in them, put cardboard in the shoes, had to be the, he became like the man of the family as a kid, but he was very entrepreneurial, pharmacist, and, started pharmacies and was one of the founders of this department store called Ames in New England. That was like a huge department store. So entrepreneurship has run in my family, for a bunch of years. And I think honestly, actually, even before that, my grandparents on the other side of my family owned, my great-grandparents on the other side of my family owned what was called a dry goods store, which is basically like textiles, clothing, and stuff like that, which was a pretty common business for Jewish immigrants to go into because, the thing about Jewish immigration into this country that gave, the Eastern European Jews an advantage as an immigrant group is that while they were living in poor environments and they were persecuted and their rights were limited to own property and things like that, they still lived in an urban setting where they, were bakers and owned tailor, clothing shops and would sew their own clothes. And especially in New York, and I think just in the Northeast in general, the textile business was so big, was big, but was comprised of a lot of mom and pop shops. And so when you come in with that skill set, instead of working for a giant company, you might be working for a 4-person company and sitting next to the boss. And so you can actually learn how to be a business owner. And so, where you compare that to like Irish or Italian coming in from more like rural farming communities where their skill set in the manual labor that they're doing, you might be doing construction, or you might be doing, even if you're doing farming, you're not really adjacent to somebody in a leadership, business ownership position where you can transition from being, a bricklayer to being the foreman of, owning the company, because those were larger scale companies at the time. And then of course, like, people of color coming to this country is like, even, forget it. I'm just really comparing like European white immigrant groups and explaining where, Jews had certain advantages that were just circumstantial. But then of course, other immigrant groups, it's like the disadvantages are, that's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah.
People who respect the code we leave on them. Graffiti artists, beatboys, the beatboxers, MCs and DJs who keep it proper. The past to living now and those to keep it stop. And it don't stop. stop. And it don't 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 stop.